Be yourself positive. Just another mindset.
Hello, friends, and welcome to a new episode of the Just Another Mindset podcast, the show that inspires you to change and live a more exciting life. My name is Ishmael, and each week I bring to you a relevant conversation, message, or topic that will not only entertain you, but help you to change towards a more meaningful and satisfying life, individually and collectively. Let us get inspired and embrace collective changes for the better. In today's episode, I had the great opportunity to talk to Jeremy about positive psychology, mental toughness, and resilience. We talk about why so many people are too shielded. Most of us live in a life without effort, and leaving the comfort zone would create resilience and eventually happiness. We talk about the fact that mental fatigue may impact your physical fatigue, and we talk a lot about ultramarathons. We talk about relatedness, autonomy, and competence, and how they can improve your work and your intrinsic motivation. We further discuss acknowledgement of nice moments and active thankfulness, and how this can improve your well-being. And finally, we talk about why all of us should be more hopeful. Perfect. So thank you, Jeremy, for being here today, and welcome everybody for another episode of the Just Another Mindset podcast. And today I'm talking to Jeremy Sutton, and he's based in Northern Ireland, and he is a freelance writer, a content creator, designer, technical author, and a performance psychologist. That's a lot of hats you're wearing there, Jeremy. And with that, I want to welcome you to the Just Another Mindset podcast.
Thank you, Ishmael. It's lovely to be here.
Very good. How do you feel today?
Good. Yeah, I'm recovering from a little bit of COVID. I had about a week and a half where I didn't really do too much, but thankfully vaccinated up and feeling fit and well. So keen to get on and out running and working. Well, I haven't really stopped working actually, but my wife suggested I should have done. But I kind of find a lot of pleasure in what I'm doing. And yes, you're right. I do wear a lot of hats. I have a background from IT, but I moved more into psychology. So it's an area I'm very passionate about sort of mental wellness, well-being, how to improve our overall performance and get better. I think I'm still learning, as we all are. There's always scope for learning.
Absolutely. And again, like it's a pleasure to have you here, especially after having recovered. And I'm very glad that you do feel better. And you opened already two nice doorways. One is the positive psychology and the optimism. Do you want to tell us a little bit, since when does it play a major role in your life? And what are you doing today with it?
It's a very good question, actually. And it's almost difficult to know where to begin, but I think it actually begins with my running, fun enough. Most roads lead back to my running. I've been a runner for about 15, 16 years, gradually building up to ultramarathons. And ultramarathons, I'm a slow ultramarathoner, but I very much enjoy it, although it's quite painful at the time. And I often think, why am I doing this? Doing the ultramarathons led me to do a PhD looking at endurance athletes, their physiology, but predominantly their psychology. So what it is, the mental toughness, the personality they have, the drive, the intrinsic motivation. Once I'd done that, I ended up in a job working for a company called Positive Psychology, where I write about positive psychology for therapists and people who are generally interested in that sort of subject area. I think what I've found with both sports psychology and positive psychology, it moves away from what traditionally has been called the disease model of psychology. And the old model was very much someone walks in with a problem, the psychologist tries to fix it. Positive psychology, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's definitely a time and a place for that. For many of us at times, we will need help. Positive psychology goes a little bit further, and it says, right, we don't just want you to get back to where you were. That might be a good starting point, but where could you get to? Where's your ideal self? Where would you like to be a year down the line, 2 years down the line? So it's really about going beyond survival into either thriving or flourishing. And it's a fascinating area. I don't think there's any, it's not limited. The scope is very broad. Particularly I find interesting the kind of embodied aspect of positive psychology. It's not really talked about too much, but I think we have to remember our brain, our cognition sits within our body, our physical body, and also within our physical environment and the relationships we have. So I'm very much interested in where we sit within our lives and how we can use some of those skills to push what is possible out there. A lot of the positive psychology movement was started by Martin Seligman, and he's written a number of books. He's a fascinating guy. He really turned psychology on its head by saying, look, let's look at what we can do to improve people's lives, not just fix them. And he came up with a model called the PERMA model, believing that wellness and happiness is really down to 5 things: positive emotions, so things like openness, joy, awe, engagement, which often we talk about as flow now. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi talks about flow, when you just feel great and in the moment, and we've all caught those glimpses of it and felt great, and it's something we all try and get back. And then relationships, so how do we relate to what we're doing, but the people in our lives? How do we find meaning? So goals are great, but they should align with the bigger picture of what life means to us. And then accomplishment. So that's the thing. Yeah. I mean, we all have short-term goals. It could be filling in your tax form. They're not fun. But the bigger picture is, I don't know, I want to start this business because it will give me more time to spend with my family, or whatever is important to you. And it's very individual and specific to each person. And then accomplishment. So they can be anything. Accomplishment can be having a child. It could be to finish a degree, start a business, as I've said, write a book. Again, whatever ties in with that meaning as well.
Mm-hmm. So I understand that this positive psychology is not only to cure or to recover from a certain state, but it goes the next step, if you want to say, and it wants to improve something. So it really wants to work on individuals, and then at a certain point probably also on groups, right? So this is why you delved in. If you say you run ultra marathons, just for everybody who doesn't know the concept of an ultra marathon, what is it and what can we understand like that? A marathon, I believe, is 42 kilometers something for a run. What is an ultra marathon? Where does it start, and where's Jeremy?
But what I class as really good ultra marathoners, there's no limit. But
okay,
yes, you're right. A marathon is 42 and a little kilometers, or 26 miles. An ultra marathon would typically be anything beyond that, but it would be typically 50 kilometers, 50 miles, 100 kilometers, 100 miles. But people are going far beyond that. I mean, there's people who run across the US. There's guys who are running for 48 hours. There's some incredible athletes out there, and they're often not very well known. People like Kilian Jornet, Dean Karnezes is quite well known in the US. He's been quite a popular ultra runner for years, but there's many out there. I class myself as an almost accidental ultra marathoner. I don't really spend as much time training as I should, just because of family, work, and life commitments.
Okay.
But the longest I've done is 100 kilometers, which took between 12 and 14 hours, which was a couple of years ago. It was the year before COVID hit. My training has been a little bit off over the last 2 years, and there's been very few events. But to me, an ultra marathon I don't view it as a competition. I'm not trying to get a placing. I'm usually not even really specific. I'm not really focusing on a time. To me, it is a challenge, to use the phrase. It is a journey, I suppose. It is the journey itself rather than the ending. And you go within an ultra marathon, you go through massive highs and massive lows. So it's a little bit like life in a day, and that's why I love it. It's quite cathartic. It feels quite healing in an odd way. I mean, at the time, when you're 8 hours into a run and your feet are hurting and you're thinking, I'm hungry, but I can't eat, and I'm thirsty, but I don't want to drink, it can feel awful. But oddly, it's quite a healing process. And certainly a lot of the work around resilience has been around about pushing people's limits. So the way to one of the ways to build resilience is to confront yourself with challenges. And I think physical challenges are particularly important. Now, that might be running a 5K for someone who's not a runner. I mean, I started off 15 years ago, getting to the end of the road and having to stop. And I was, that was where I was. And that was challenging at the time. So it doesn't really matter the size of the challenge, but it's the fact that it's a challenge to the individual. And that, I think, pushes up your resilience. And it does help with stress and anxiety. I think when I was in the middle of my PhD, I was working full time. My youngest daughter arrived in year 2 of my PhD.
Okay.
So I had a lot going on. It got about year 4 of 6 years. And I thought, I'm not sure I can do this. And I felt I was having a tough time. And it was at that point when I did another ultramarathon, because I found it would give me control over what I was doing. It felt like I had control over this one aspect. And that control, that feeling, that perception kind of leaked out into other areas of my life where I thought, well, yeah, I do have control of what I do. Certain things I don't, and I have to accept, but there's a lot that I do. And I think sports psychology is very aligned with performance and positive psychology, in that it's looking at what you can do rather than what you can't. And sometimes it involves reframing. So some of our beliefs, when they're unhelpful, like, oh, I'm rubbish at this, when actually your past shows that you're really quite good at something. So sometimes it involves a bit of reframing. It could also involve attending to different aspects of your life, like I just said, aspects that are in control, or aspects you would like to get into control, and things like goal setting as well. Where do I want to be in 3 months, 6 months, or even next week?
Okay, understood. And that what you're just describing reminds me of the quote, I read it in, I believe it was in your dissertation. It's like, mental toughness is the unshakable self-belief in the ability to achieve goals and the determination to bounce back from performance setbacks. And if you talk about the ultra marathons, and if you talk about a PhD itself, I'm more than sure that there is a lot of setbacks, and that you need to have this ability to bounce back and to actually face life and face those challenges, right?
I think you do. And actually, I was thinking before we talked, there was 2 stories that I thought mental toughness is going to come up, and it's an interesting area. We talk more about resilience now, but I think mental toughness, there's a lot of overlaps. I don't really know where one stops and the other one starts, but mental toughness, that was Peter Clough, I think you quoted, and he came up with an idea of the 4 C's. So believing that mental toughness is built from confidence, control, commitment, and challenge. And going back to the ultra marathons, when I ran the 100-kilometer, which is the greatest distance I'd done, which is far beyond sort of really where my limits lied, I flew over to London the night before to do the ultra the next day. My flight was delayed. I had problems with the hotel. All the restaurants were shut by the time we got there. I ended up eating McDonald's the day before an ultra marathon, which, I'm not knocking fast food, but probably not the best setup.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I didn't sleep very well, and I had to be up early the next day. And I ended up downstairs at the hotel waiting for the taxi, which was also late. And I'd had about 3 or 4 hours sleep. And I thought, I really don't think I can do this, but I thought I've got to practice some of what I preach. And the only way I could do it was to reframe the setting. And I thought, I've got to forget everything before 5 a.m, this time I'm at, and say, yesterday didn't happen. This is a brand new day. Let's just move forward. And it kind of worked, that reframing of sort of thinking, this is a new day. I can't control the past. I have no control over it. Yes, it was messy. It didn't go as planned, but either I take that with me or I let go. And sometimes we can do that in life, and sometimes we can't. It's not always easy. When we lose jobs or family members or relationships, it can be very difficult. And resilience is not as simple as just bouncing back. It's finding a way to move forward. The second story I was thinking of as well, at the beginning of the pandemic, I was in a different job. I was still working in more of a business job that was very stressed. And my daughter was at home because all the schools were shut. It just felt a difficult time. And it was Friday afternoon, and I'd got some music on, and I was working in the spare room. And my daughter came up and she just started dancing on the bed. And I stopped what I was doing and stopped feeling stressed and thought, actually, it's going to be okay. This is okay. We've got what we need. Thankfully, we're safe for the moment. We've got everything we have. Again, I have no control of everything that's going on outside of this room and this house. But again, it did come down to that reframing. And as I said, it's not always an easy thing to do. But there are times, if you kind of show yourself a bit of self-compassion and acceptance, where you can do that. And I think that's what positive psychology is about, for me at least.
So it sounds like the basis of positive psychology is also really to understand what is in your control and what is not in your control, and then to focus on working on whatever is in your control, and then having a strong, resilient mindset and so forth, right? But also the first steps really sounds like what you cannot control: if there's restaurants open, if your taxi is going to be late, if the hotel is whatever it's going to be. You cannot control that, but you can control your mindset around the whole event, and you can still decide to show up, and you can still decide to go for this ultra marathon, even though it might be the first time, or if it's your 30th time. I believe, and that's just an assumption I have, but with an ultra marathon, probably the first one is hard, but the 25th is just as hard, right? Or do you get used to run distances like that?
It's like some people you meet. I met a guy once. As I said, I'm based over in Northern Ireland. I was testing ultramarathon as part of my PhD. And I said to one of the guys, just out of interest, what's your marathon time? And a lot of ultramarathoners don't really bother with marathons because there's a different mindset. Usually marathons are driven by time. Someone wants to do 4 hours, 3 hours, or 2.5 hours, or whatever. He said, well, it's hard for me to say. He said, because the last marathon I did was at the end of a 100-mile run. So it turned out he'd ran from Belfast to Dublin, which is about 100 miles, in time for the Dublin Marathon, and then ran the marathon down there. So it gives you an idea of the mindset. And interestingly, I expected it to be a clear delineation between ultramarathoners and non-ultramarathoners, that ultramarathoners would be simply more mentally tough. It didn't turn out as clear as that. Mental toughness does seem to be linked to the ability to overcome pain and discomfort. But the thing that was most interesting is the difference between ultramarathons and non-ultramarathons in the ones I tested was their degree of openness to new experience. So ultramarathons in my study, and it doesn't always show the same in other studies, but they were very open to new experiences and ideas. And I think that's quite an interesting thing, that we all at times get quite fixed in our mindset, in our ways of thinking. We can do this, we can't do that. We aren't any good at that, but we're good at this. Once we accept and give ourselves more openness, we're more likely to try things and fail. Failing's okay. I often talk to my 8-year-old, and she's very good at things like maths, but I explained to her that failing is okay. That's a great way of learning. Don't worry, it's okay if you get something wrong. So yeah, it's ultramarathoners are an interesting breed. I don't do the training I should. I tend to throw myself into it and see what happens, which is, it's always an experience then.
No, but that's wonderful that there's one characteristics that ultramarathon runners share is really this experience, or like the openness for new experience and experimenting, right? So I don't know if you have a personal perception of things, but also, like, I worked in the management consulting area and surrounded also by a lot of investment bankers and so forth. And with the time that COVID came, a lot of people jumped into running or preparing for Ironman. Some were already looking into that beforehand, but COVID really, I mean, there was not much to do. So some people really focused on sports, right? Which, I mean, there's worse things to focus on. But it would also be interesting for me to hear from you. I mean, okay, we learned that there is great things for your mind that can help you also in your daily life. But if we think about extreme sports like that, is there also any downsides of the mindset of either the people who do that sports, or also just the physical component, something that you should be very aware before you say, okay, I'm going to jump into an ultra marathon? I mean, the longest I have done is a half marathon, so not even a fifth of that. So
I do think, I think an ultra, I think it's getting to a half marathon is as difficult, if not more difficult, than getting from a half marathon to an ultra marathon, because I think it's those early months and years of running that are very difficult. I do think over time, when I run an ultra marathon now, I kind of know what to expect, although it seems to always take me by surprise. But I know it's going to hurt. Once acceptance is a huge thing, and actually there's a therapy called acceptance and commitment therapy that's quite aligned with positive psychology, and it sort of tells the people who are using it as a treatment to accept more, be more self-compassionate, accept their concerns and their worries, and then make a commitment to move forward. I think sometimes with stress and difficult situations, we try and fight it, and fighting it is actually adding to our stress. So if I said to you, let's go back to the tax example. If I said to you, I'm stressed about filling out my tax return, and I'd say I shouldn't be stressed, I'm just adding to my stress. Once you accept it as like an app running on your iPad or your iPhone in the background, it's there, but you can own it and use it. There's a lady, Alia Crum, who talks about see it, own it, use it, that recognize there's a stress, identify, even name it, then own it, recognize that you've got it and that you can use it to fuel yourself. Going back to one of the earlier points you asked about in terms of the positives and negatives of ultramarathons, the only negatives I've seen, I think, and obviously you do need to build up gradually. It'd be crazy just to go out and start running 100 kilometers. You really need to build up to it, which is kind of an obvious physical thing. I think the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation is probably worth talking about. Intrinsic motivation, for anyone who doesn't know, is doing something simply for the sake of doing it, for the love of doing it, because you enjoy it. If you are an artist, I know you're a writer, you're probably doing it just because it gives you pleasure. You probably aren't expecting to earn a lot of money from it, but it's something you're doing for pleasure. Extrinsic motivation is where you're driven by external factors, rewards, recognition. It could be that, if I do this, someone will think I'm really important or powerful or impressive. Now, I've met different sorts of ultramarathoners. The intrinsic one, I believe I'm intrinsic in the sense that I'm never going to win. I'm never even going to come in the top half of the field. If I finish, I've succeeded because that's what I was intending to do. The pressure is less, where I've met other ultramarathoners who must get in the top 10. They must get in the top 5. They must be number 1 or number 2. And I've seen them take the stress that they have in their daytime job and add to that stress with extrinsically motivated running. And I'm not saying that's always wrong, because some people are good and they're competitive and they get a lot from it. And that's how people win at things. I'm not saying we should never strive to do better. For me, an ultramarathon is very much about the intrinsic experience. And that's what gives me mental respite, I suppose. It gives me peace of mind because I'm just trying to finish it and experience the journey along the way. And that's the journey is what I find fascinating. It's just, you don't know what's going to, I've done an ultramarathon, and I've done ultramarathons in the past where I've cried and I've laughed within the space of minutes, because your emotions are probably very heightened. You're probably getting a fix of hormones and adrenaline, but you almost have time to work through some of what's going on in life, which most of us don't give ourselves time to do, especially in the age of mobile phones, where it's very hard to not reach for a phone and check a feed, social media. How popular are we? What's everyone else doing with their lives? It gives you that freedom, which for me is just a joy.
No, absolutely. And I believe that this intrinsic motivation is certainly the more long-term healthy version of it. Because if you understand that you just finish, and it doesn't matter if it's 12 hours, 13 hours, 14 hours, or 10 hours. I don't know what's the fastest ultra marathon on 100 kilometers, but it's not so much about times, right? Because this is what I see also with a lot of people who go for marathons. As you said, like the first one, you need to finish in 3:45. The second one then has to be 3:15. And if the third one is not underneath 3 hours, it's a complete failure. And people don't give themselves room to develop and to understand, okay, is this really what I need to do? Or do I just want to go for this very run? And I find it very interesting what you said earlier. Basically, it's life in a day, because I could only imagine in 100 kilometers, yes, you go through all those different emotions. Probably you question yourself, why am I doing this multiple times? And latest, once you finish, you know exactly why you've done it. I think this is true, at least for my running experience, even for shorter runs. And then the longer you do it, I mean, if you go for 10, 12 hours and you run, it's a quite monotonous activity. So you must be into it anyways. But still, I believe you also get this reward. And I think it's important, or it is good to have this intrinsic motivation for things, right? So to also have an understanding that, yeah, you are the one that you do it for. And it's not so much about other people's validation. Probably your family is happy once you run it. That's what I heard from another triathlete. Actually, they were like, whenever he or she is done with the triathlon, it's good because then we have him back in the family. But I think this is the much of the extrinsic validation that you should maybe get.
Yeah. Time is a challenge. Like I said, I don't tend to train as much as I should, just because my family commitments are so important. So I will often split my training up. So rather than doing one big run, I'll maybe do a run in the morning and then a run in the evening, or a run in the evening and then the next morning. Because for me, it works quite well, because it's almost like the beginning and the end of an ultra marathon anyway. And then if you're doing things during the day, whatever that might be, it's tiring in itself. So that works quite well. But yeah, for some people, they can become very consumed by it. For me, it's an experience, but also a tool. It does. I think my wife would agree. I always come back from a run in a better frame of mind than I left, because it's funny, the weather can be quite bad in Northern Ireland. It's not always particularly sunny. It's often wet, windy. It's not always great. But once you're out on it, it's just a wonderful experience. And I mentioned Dean Karnezes before. He's an American ultramarathoner who very much popularized the sport in the US. And when he started off, people thought he was a little bit crazy, because the ultramarathon running was still fairly new. But in one of his books, he talks about how he believes we're all too shielded nowadays. Especially in the US, people leave their air-conditioned car for an air-conditioned office. At the end of the day, get back in and pick up some fast food on the way. And we're all guilty of that. We're living a life without effort and without discomfort. And he very much says that discomfort is good, because that is what is going to build you resilience for other aspects of your life. And it's more authentic as well. I think most of us would agree we feel much better when we've been outside. And one of the areas that I sort of touched on briefly within my PhD was what's called embodied cognition. So our thinking being housed within our body and within the environment we're in. And embodied cognition really sort of says that there's not necessarily a limit of our psychology just to our brain, in the sense that it's connected to our hands, to our limbs, to the things we're using, the glasses I'm wearing. Everything's part of our cognition, not directly. Obviously, my glasses aren't thinking or coming up with beliefs, but they're all part of who we are. And same with our physical body. So making use of that physical body has to be something positive. And one thing that's worth going back to, talking about timings for marathons, they've shown that the effect of the mind on a physical performance is huge, which is why if you look at the timings on a marathon, if you plot the timings, finishes, well, the largest number of finishes will be just before the hour mark. So there'll be a spike in the number of finishes before 3 hours, 4 hours, and 5 hours. So even though people will think they've given everything, it kind of proves they haven't, because they've actually managed to get to a particular time. And similarly, they've shown that obviously the marathoner who finishes at the end of an Olympic marathon, they'll collapse momentarily, but then they'll run a lap of honor, celebrating their win. So the psychobiological model shows that actually our mind often limits our physical performance, and probably both ways. Our physicality affects how we feel as well. So it's a very sort of symbiotic link between the two.
Absolutely. Is there any data that suggests how big the component of the mind really is? I believe one big component, if we talk about sports, and that could be any sports, is your physicality. It's just your training. How often did you do it before? Is it just something you jumped on 3 months ago, or is it something you were doing for 30 years? Then probably genetics play some kind of role. This is, again, an assumption.
Oh, yeah.
But is there any data that suggests, okay, how much is really this mindset piece?
There definitely is data. I don't have it to hand, but even if you take something like coffee as a stimulant, coffee has been shown to improve running. So if you were going to do a VO2 test, so where you're going to run to exhaustion on a treadmill to test how much oxygen you can take in, known as a VO2 test, having coffee before can improve your ability to run longer and faster. And the reason for that is not just it's a physical stimulant, but it actually changes your perception of effort, which is kind of interesting to think that, there's been work around mental fatigue. So Sam Marcora, who used to be based at the University of Kent, has done some fantastic, he was the one who came up with the psychobiological model. He found that if he put people on a treadmill and they'd been doing like an hour of Sudokus or any sort of mental challenging task, they would quit more easily and sooner. So even being mental fatigue impacts physical fatigue. So there's such a clear link. But yes, there's certainly evidence out there. I don't know what the percentages are, but it's a huge factor, our mindset over what physically we can do.
And then the other component that you mentioned is this leaving your comfort zone, right? So once you leave your comfort zone, basically you are open to experience new things. You are open to experiments. You are open to fail. I think if you fail, or if you accept that failing, in fact, is learning, you're more keen also to find out new things, and you're also more likely to do great things, right? To really go this extra mile, or to find out that ultra marathon is really not for you and you should do a triathlon, or you should do swimming for long times, or I mean, there is a lot of different things. Is there any sports that you would or could compare to ultra marathons, be it Ironmans, be it anything else that you say they are somewhat comparable?
Yeah, I mean, certainly Ironman, any sort of event like that. I mean, the guys there are supremely fit. I think triathletes are incredibly interesting because they're trying to get really good at 3 different sports in a limited amount of time. So they tend to be very good at using the time wisely. So they often do a lot of high intensity training. They're very focused, because if you know you've got to be good at running, swimming, and cycling, then you need to spend your time wisely. I'm interested, I think distance swimmers are a fascinating group as well, in the sense that what they're doing is quite monotonous, like running. You're just swimming, but some of these men and women are swimming for hours at a time in very harsh conditions, often cold. They could be chafing, they're in discomfort. So they're not, I haven't really read any research on open water swimmers, but they would be an interesting bunch.
Absolutely. I read last year, I spent some time on the Canaries, and in fact with a friend of mine who was preparing for 73, so half an Ironman. And at some point we started looking into the longest distance that people were swimming. And it reads super interesting, but also a little bit crazy, I must say, what people are up to. And I remember this one woman, I don't recall her name. I will check that and link it here afterwards. And it's about her swimming out in the ocean, I think a bit more than 200 kilometers. And then at the very end of the article, you find out that she is like 65 or something. So,
and often these people don't look like typical athletes as well. There's an English lady called Nikki Spinks who had, I think she was in her 50s when she did this, but she'd recovered from cancer. She'd been through a lot, and there's a race in England that's been running for like, I don't know, 60 or 70 years called the Bob Graham Round, and it's over the highest peaks in England. You have to run over a set course, and it has to be done within 24 hours for you to succeed. And half the people who start it fail, and some of them come back and ultimately get through it. But it's an incredibly tough run. Now, some people in the 80s had done the double. So they'd not only done it once in 24 hours, they'd carried on to do it twice within 48 hours. And I think I forget the guy's name who'd done the best time, but it was 20 or so years before. It was some years before. No one had come near to it. And she set out to do this 48-hour run. And she beat this guy's time by a couple of hours. He was there actually supporting her and applauding her. You know, the ultramarathon community is very welcoming and warm and friendly in that sense. So people actually encourage one another, even if their record is going to be beaten. But there was a nice quote from her at one point when she was about 36, 37 hours into this huge running feat. She went into the back of her support van and said, "I just sat there and had a little cry," and then got out and carried on. But it's almost that vulnerability, that acceptance that, yes, this is horrendous and I'm not invincible, but I'm just going to let it out and carry on. So yeah, it's amazing what people are doing.
So it's not about bringing up a big shield for 3 hours, 4 hours, whatever it may take to just get through the race, but it's really like accepting yourself to an extent that with failure, with accomplishment, you're like, okay, this is the best I did. This is the best I could do. And here we have a result. And that result might be that I will come back to this race next year because I didn't finish, or that result may be that you just finished in your personal best and you come back next year anyways. Okay, so that's really interesting. And if we say, I mean, now we've talked quite a bit about ultra marathons and quite extensive and preparation extensive activities. If we take the findings from your PhD and from positive psychology into, let's say, everyday's life. So what is components that we can say, okay, that are true for athletes, but that also each and everybody can maybe use without a preparation of multiple years? So what is things that we can do? You already touched ground on a few, like goal setting and life vision and so forth. But if we would if we want to make it a little bit more tangible for the audience also, like what can each and everybody do, or what can each and everybody learn from such a mindset? Is there anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, I think the goal setting one is common in most aspects of therapy, but also crucial within positive psychology. One of the areas I find really interesting is around strengths, and it might be worth actually supplying the link to your listeners, but there's a model called a VIA. If you type in VIA strengths, you can do a free online assessment. And one of the key things within positive psychology is, rather than focusing on your weaknesses, which is the model often used within work. So both of us come from a business background where if someone identifies your weaknesses, they focus in on those. Now, though it's good to spend time getting better at what we're not so good at, what we should do in the positive psychology approach is that you focus on what your strengths are. If you fill in the assessment on VIA, and it's quite a well tested, it's a very valid assessment, it comes back with your top 5 or more strengths. And I think like this works in your favor in sport, this is hugely impactful within work and life in general. So, for instance, my top 3 are love of learning, curiosity, both quite similar. And then oddly, the third one is love. I never quite know what to do with the third one, but family is very important to me. So I guess that's how it comes out. But the love of learning and the curiosity, I try and use it. So even if I'm doing a task that is quite boring, I try and find something of interest in there, because I know I'm more likely to get into a kind of even a modest state of flow doing it, where I'm sort of really, my time flies, I'm working at my best. So I do think use of strengths, you can overuse them. I mean, there's certain strengths that, like gratitude, you wouldn't want to be overly grateful for everything someone does too much of the time, because it could become annoying. There's a balance here, but I do think if you work out what your strengths are, they're important things to take through and use where possible. So as I said, curiosity and love of learning for me can be used in most of the things I do. If there's a report I need to look at that maybe isn't something that's I'm particularly driven to focus on, I think, well, what can I learn from it? How can I use it elsewhere? What other information can I go off and research that comes into this? And that gets me sort of further. I think that ties in with goal setting as well. Intrinsic motivation is hugely important. I mean, there's a lot of work by these two guys called BC and Ryan. They created what's known as the self-determination theory. And they said that if you want to be intrinsically motivated, you need to look at your relatedness to what you're doing. So how interested are you in what you're doing? And also how connected are you with the people around you in what you're doing? How autonomous do you feel? So how much control do you have? And then competence, what's your mastery? What's your level of skills? And if you work on those three, relatedness, autonomy, and competence, it will increase your intrinsic motivation, and it will drive you forward to give more and perform better.
Absolutely. And I mean, if you are related to what you are doing, the chances are quite high, I believe, that you get more competent because you enjoy what you're doing. So you're going to learn while doing it. And also you're going to enjoy the whole learning factor. And that all plays into the intrinsic motivation, right? You've mentioned the strength and the strength analysis. And I know that there's different strength finders, let's say, out there, and many of them are good, and yes, we will link the one. And I think what is so important, or what could be so important, to know about your strength, and I mean, it's good to know about your weaknesses or your blind spots, whatever you want to call them, but it's also important to know about your strength, because then you know how to utilize them, right? And if you are not aware of them, maybe you are a person and you're not really aware of it, or you don't really believe in it, or you don't really think about it. And if you then frame it, okay, I'm good at, and this is something I really like, you can use it for all those different tasks, right? So you can say, okay, I have to do my tax, but maybe I'm going to learn something because they changed the whole tax system, and I'm going to learn something which I can then use next year, or which I can teach to my friend, or whatever it may be. So if you just frame it in a way that you can learn something, you stay curious, it helps you through those tedious tasks as well, right? Okay, so understanding strength is a big one. And I also, when doing some research for our conversation, saw that you give affirmations and self-talk quite a big value. Do we want to talk about that a little bit? What's the importance of both of them?
I think so. It ties in very much to your mindset and your self-efficacy, your self-belief. I suppose sometimes we get cynical. I do myself. Sometimes I don't practice really what I preach. And I try and remind myself that this is all founded on psychology. It's been tested. There's a book called Chatter, and I can't remember the author off the top of my head. He's written a very, very interesting book, and it's all about the endless talk that goes on our head. We're very good at focusing on negativity. We have a strong negativity bias, as they call it. So I think there's something like 86,000 seconds in a day. If one person says something bad to you that lasts 10 seconds, it can often ruin the rest of the day. And it's taken only a few seconds. We focus on that negativity. We've got a huge bias, and it makes evolutionary sense, because you want to watch out for the bad things. If an animal bit you, that's pretty serious. It's more serious than finding some fruit that you like the taste of, so that there is an element of that. The idea of affirmations such as I can do this, or self-talk like I've done this before, I can do it again, I just need to focus. It really does work in changing the beliefs and the thoughts about what you're doing, which is very powerful. I mean, a lot of people who, going back to the running, a lot of runners and athletes will have certain mantras. It could be like 2 or 3 words that they say to themselves. There was one triathlete, an Ironman triathlete, Chrissy, I forgot her surname. She would count as she was swimming, just as a way of managing those negative beliefs. So I think the affirmations and the self-talk are more of focusing on what you want than stopping to focus on what you don't want. And I think they also lend quite nicely to something I really do enjoy practicing, is visualization. Visualization, one, you can look at your past, and without dwelling on the negatives, you can think about what things went well or how things could have gone if you'd have maybe thought about it differently. But most importantly is visualizing your future self, how things could be. So you might think in a year's time, this is the way I want to be working. I want to be working remotely. It could be, I want to spend more time with my family. I want to enjoy my job. I want to have more social connections. It could be whatever life that is right for you, and it could be different for everyone. Visualization is another one where it ties in very closely with goal setting, where you start to really see how things could be, how things could look, and how you'd like to get there. So it's tangible in the sense that it gives you a goal state. You know where you are now, and you can start putting in the steps between. So yeah, I think they're all quite powerful tools.
Absolutely. Let's look into visualization. Now you've used the time frame of 1 year. Is that also like the time horizon that you would most usually use for visualization? Or could you also use 3 years? Could you use 5 years, 10 years? What is the different level of visualizations that you're creating? Because goals, as I understand, and as most business people would agree, goals is usually quarterly, maybe yearly goals, but that's already big goals. So if you talk about visualization, what is the frame, the time frame that you would suggest using, if there is any, that is a general rule of thumb?
It's a really good question. And I suppose there isn't a definitive answer, is whatever is working for you. I think with all of these tools, we shouldn't ever use these tools to beat ourselves up, because we do enough of that as it is. So it could be that you think, I don't know, I'm a bit lost in my life. I've got a job, I've got a family I love, things are going okay, but maybe I've got a big picture. Maybe I want to start that business. Maybe I want to become an artist, a musician, whatever it is. Or maybe I just want to change career. That might be a longer term goal, but you don't want it so far ahead that it's just in the distance and it's not tangible, it's not real, it's not physical. You may want to shorten that down and think, well, yeah, I'd like to change my career, but the way I change my career is by getting the qualifications I need. So let's focus on that. Imagine myself next year having this degree, this certification, whatever it might be, and I've got it. What would that feel like? How would people notice me being different? How would I notice me being different? So you want to bring it down into something that's tangible that you can really deliver on. But then I think also the short term, it could be, I get nervous presenting in front of people. It terrifies me. But as we all know, we sometimes have to do these things. So I will visualize standing up in front of people, what it feels like. And the first few times of visualizing it feels terrifying because I try and make it as real as possible. So I imagine the faces, I imagine the room, the smell, how I'm feeling, what I'm wearing, what I'm going to talk about. And the first few times it's awful. It's like I feel like I'm there. But then as you revisit that visualization, it becomes easier. And there's other things that I had to do a talk a few years back at the University of Manchester. And launching into full imposter syndrome. I thought all of the people in the audience know far more than me. These are really intelligent people in front of me. They'll realize I don't know what I'm talking about. And I spent a lot of time visualizing. And the other thing I did, there's a book by and a very good TED talk by Amy Cuddy. The book is called Presence. And she talks about standing in either the Superman pose or the Wonder Woman pose or whatever. And I remember going off to the toilets just before this presentation, doing the Superman pose for like a couple of minutes. I think it helped. It felt like it helped. So it's kind of whatever works for you, and it could be great. It could be a lucky coin that you keep in your pocket or whatever it might be. Anything that works for you is valid. There's nothing that isn't valid in that sense. As long as it's not harming anyone else and it's a positive thing, it's worth trying.
And probably also, again, this acceptance, right? To say, okay, for me, this coin has a meaning, so it will work. And then the self-talk and the understanding that this will actually help, or bringing whatever it may be. It could be a t-shirt, it could be a pose, it could be whatever it may be, but also accepting that this is just fine. There is not one solution fits it all, and not everybody has to do this and that. But if you really experiment and try out and see what else is out there, you will most likely find something that works for yourself, right?
Okay. My daughter was about 5, I think, or maybe 6 when I was doing my Viva. So when you do at the end of the PhD, you have to present your findings. And I've been working on this PhD for 6 years, and it was hard work with, as I said, with a full-time job and family. And so the Viva was a huge deal. I knew I had to talk for an hour about what I'd done for 6 years. So this was really important. And I was explaining to her in words she'd understand what I was doing. And she said, hold on a minute. And she ran off to her bedroom and came back with a big blue stapler. She said, you can put all your papers in the not paperclip, sorry, not stapler. You can put all your papers in the paperclip. So I took it in with me. And when I was talking, I found myself fiddling with the paperclip, and it kind of kept me grounded and thought, there's a life outside of this. This is important, but there's a life outside. So it can be odd, the tools that for people in sports, people will often have certain practices that they perform, a way they tie their shoelaces, the way they lay out their clothes before they begin something. It can all help. It's getting your mindset into that kind of growth zone.
If we talk about self-talk and if we talk about convictions, is there also something that you have to be, I don't know if careful is the right word, but should you not talk yourself into certain things too fast? Like, I don't know, like going on 100-kilometer, 200-kilometer runs, or going and taking a task that's maybe not made for you, or just quitting your job and going into this career? Is there some experience that you would want to share, or is there a certain degree that you should maybe not leave? Is there anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, it's a good question. I suppose by nature I'm quite cautious. Some people are maybe more brave than I am. I worked in IT and business for years, for decades, though I'd always kept an interest in psychology because my first degree was in cognitive science. It was looking at human and artificial thinking. While I was working, as I said, I didn't give up my job in IT to do my PhD. So I kind of had a foot in 2 camps at the time. Then when I finished my PhD, I started getting more involved in psychology jobs and doing writing and that sort of thing. But I maintained my IT job at the time because I didn't want to make that leap until I knew, I could sustain myself. Now, some people might have been more brave, but I was worried about paying the bills and these sort of things. Then, interestingly, when COVID hit, the company I was working for, a large bank, and I was a contractor with them. And although they sort of said there won't be any changes as a result of COVID, a month later they laid us all off. And it's funny how you look at life, isn't it? I was very fortunate in the sense that I was already working for this other company writing for them. When I was told on the call that my contract was being ended, I actually thought, I felt a little bit of relief because I thought this is giving me the push that I need. I've been working with a great bunch of people, but I knew there was something else I should be doing, and I didn't quite have that courage to take the step. So when they let me go, I contacted the people I was working for part-time and said, look, I'm available full-time if you're interested. And then it led on to a whole new career in psychology and writing that has allowed me, the most interesting thing about the writing is it's opened up a world of talking to people like yourself, people all around the world who just reach out and say, I'm interested in this, or have you heard about this? And I've learned so much and got so much from the people I've met, and hopefully I've given something back as well. So I think I would have quite a measured approach, but sometimes life just pushes you and it just works out. And you do have to decide when to just go with the flow. I could have been in denial and pretended it wasn't happening, but I thought, actually, I'm going to turn this into a positive. I'm going to use this in a way that's going to get me into a role that's maybe more authentic and, hopefully allows me to grow. And also, as I said, family is massively important for me with the ups and downs, the lockdowns of COVID. I was able to spend more time with my daughter, who was off school for much of a year because the schools were shut here. So it allowed me to not be hidden away all the time on Zoom calls with work colleagues for like 7 hours a day, to getting up early, and I'd do a lot of my work before she was even up in the morning or late at night, and spending more time with her in the day. So sometimes it's about finding ways of finding the positives in what can seem like a negative. And that isn't always the case. Sometimes a negative just is a negative, but you can always find something in there that will make it better, I suppose.
Yeah, and I mean, absolutely, a negative absolutely can be a negative, but it can still trigger some kind of consequence, and you then can decide, how do you frame this consequence, right? Is it like not having a job anymore? Or is it being able to focus on the job that you probably like a little bit better anyways, and you get this final push? So some changes are very active changes, and you take 3 months, 3 years, or 30 years to make this change. Or you don't, because somebody else makes that change. And then I believe it is, again, on your mindset, and probably you are A, very resilient, and B, you make use of changes that are being made for you, and accept what you can control, and just say, okay, this is now the next logical step, and where do things go from here, right? So
it really does. Yeah. Well, one of the things I've been looking at more recently, which wasn't something I'd ever really thought about really up until the last few months, but there's been quite a bit of work around hope and learned hopelessness, learned hopefulness, which is the opposite of learned hopelessness. Sometimes there's been some experiments done in the past that's shown that if you keep failing at something, or things keep going wrong and you have no control over it, you can become helpless. You get this learned helplessness. The opposite of that is learned hopefulness, where you view hopefulness not just as a state and an emotion, which it probably is, but also as a habit that can be learned. And again, going back to Martin Seligman, some of the work he did around optimism and hope, he found that positive psychology can give you more hope. Certain quite simple practices can make you more hopeful and more likely to feel happier, recover, and even avoid depression, but also get to the goals that are important to you. One of the classic ones is so simple, and I do find myself often doing this at night. You may have come across this. It's got many different names, but the idea is that at night you think about 3 things that happened during the day that were positive. And it could be a smile from the person who served you in the coffee shop. It could be, I don't know, in my case, it might be my daughter playing football with me. Or it could be having a call like this, where you had a good chat with someone, you feel you're connected, you understood where they're coming from. It can be anything, big or small. It doesn't matter what your life is. There's no limits here. It could be a sunrise. You could open the windows, the curtains, and you see the sun and you think, life is good. And by dwelling for even a short amount of time every night on 3 things that you're grateful for, like that, they've shown huge shifts in people's well-being, and it's such a simple thing to do. And I don't always do this. It's not every night I'm like, right, 3 things, come up with it. Again, you don't want to stress yourself, but I think it's one of those things, especially if you're having trouble falling asleep, where you can kind of, the word is probably to savor those moments, to revisit them and think, that was good, that was really good, because we naturally focus on the negatives, and we're all guilty of that. I do it myself. You get a letter in the post that tells you something bad, or a bill or something, your day is ruined.
You could have done this better, faster, stronger. And it's super interesting that you bring up this particular example, because just also to exchange, to share some practices, is my wife and I every night before going to bed keep a journal. What are we thankful for in this particular day? And usually it's somewhere between 3 to 7 bullets, I want to call it. And it really varies from, it can be, I had the nicest cup of water in the morning after my run, and that was just perfect. Or it could be something super big. Just recently, it was my birthday. She gave me like a super nice birthday present. Then it was that. But it really varies from too. And it doesn't have to be big things all the time, but just to acknowledge what are you thankful for frames the brain probably in the right sequence for the night. And then during the night, you're going to dream about the stuff, and maybe not only about your 7 bullets or your 3 bullets, but I think it really does frame stuff. So it's interesting that, it's a practice we do.
Proven. And there's been a lot of research into it. Seligman, in one of his books, he talks about the research they did on it, where they took groups of people and gave them some, they didn't give them any intervention or practice, and others they gave different, and that was one of the top ones. I think 2 of the others, and I'd have to check, but I think 2 of the others were, one was around thinking back to something that went wrong, such as, like I described, losing my job. That initially would seem like a bad thing, but then what positives came out of that. So it's reflecting on actually the good, and that creates hope, because you think, well, a bad thing in the past, loss of job or whatever it might be, often has positives in it. And sometimes it is hard to see those positives, but often they are there. And the other one, which we've already described, is this visualization of this ideal self. How would I like to be? How would I like people to see me in some time in the future? They all engage hope. So I'm fascinated with the hope side of things at the moment. It's that it kind of lifts the whole self into a better place. All of these other smaller things, like managing stress, seeing it, owning it, using it, these things are hugely important, as are things like therapy, talking therapy. There's so many massively powerful things. But I think hope, and the other one which I'd tie in with that, is awe. We don't tend to think about awe, that looking out over a beautiful sea and going, wow, that's beautiful. We don't tend to use those positive emotions enough. And yet when we do, they connect with a lot of other positive emotions, like openness, which we've already talked about, to put ourselves in a better state. And I look back on my life and I think the times when I've been best, when I've been at my best, is when I've been most hopeful. And the times when I've been at my worst is when I've been lacking in hope, when I've felt hopeless, when things have just not been going great and you're like, oh, really? And I think if you can increase that hope, it can make you more resilient.
No, absolutely. And this is, I believe, where also self-talk and also negative self-talk can blend in again, right? So if things seem hopeless and you tell yourself that it is hopeless and that there is no point in pursuing activity A or B or C, then probably you go down this path. But if you in fact realize that there is some kind of hope, and things may change for the better, and yes, this negative is real negative, but what do we do from here? So if we talk about hope, what could be other ideas? How can people become more hopeful, or how can they invite hope into their lives? Is there, we talked about this activity in the evening. Is there other tangible examples that come to mind or that you came across?
Yeah, I think we've probably covered them to some degree, but I think one of the ones is around, sometimes people call it benefit finding. So it's finding those positives in the situations that are around us. And the analogy I'd use, some years ago, I learned to ride a motorbike and I wasn't very good. To be perfectly honest, I'm just not very good on a motorbike. But I had a bit of time off and thought this would be a great thing to do. And one of the things you have to do on certainly the tests in England, you have to do what they call a slow turn. You have to do a tight turn so that you're facing from one side of the road all the way around to facing the other side of the road. And I kept hitting the curb when I got to the other side of the road. I said, I can't do this. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. And the guy said to me, where are you looking? I said, well, I'm looking at the curb. He said, but that's what you want to avoid. Look down the road at where you want to go. And I thought about that. That's like a lesson for life. I mean, he was talking about a motorbike. And actually, the next time I did it, I failed my test overall, but I did do that bit. But there's a lesson there. I think it's that where your focus is massively important, where your focus is at is massively important. We all have to focus on bad things at times. It's just, if we get a puncture in our car tire, you've got to deal with it. You can't pretend it hasn't happened. But you can then focus on the positives that happen. They've done other studies where they've looked at medical procedures, and they've found that if the end of the procedure is there, it has a lot of discomfort for the patient, they will remember the whole procedure as bad. If the end of the procedure is done in such a way where actually it's not that uncomfortable and it was okay at the end, they will remember the whole procedure as being okay. So it does come down to that focus. Where is our focus at? And nudging that focus into something positive. So it could be, yeah, you do the job you don't want to do, but immediately follow it up with something you do want to do. I even try and do this with my daughter's homework at times. So even if it's been a tough bit of homework, I'll try and end on something positive, because then that will affect how she'll remember the whole piece. So it's kind of reframing and focus put in together, I think.
That makes perfect sense. I believe Daniel Kahneman also describes this remembering as we remember the peaks and the very end. So if we end on a good note with whatever we do or with whatever we think, this might help, right? And this is this framing. So yes, the first 80% of this run may not be fun because, I don't know, you have the first time using those shoes and so forth or whatsoever. But if you end on something positive, it does have a tremendous effect on your mindset and on your perception of things. I mean, also, like, I've traveled quite a few countries, and if I think back of those countries, it's always been great. You only remember the good things, and you only remember or my brain at least always remembers the good things.
That's good, because some people would remember the bad things, and that's where they need to be nudged. You might think of a country you went to where your accommodation wasn't very good, but you might focus instead on the beautiful castle that you saw the next day. And it does depend how you think. And all of these things can be learned and practiced. We sometimes think of ourselves as, oh, I'm not optimistic, I'm not hopeful, I'm not this person. These are learned skills. These are learned habits that we can practice. And it does take effort, and we need to remind ourselves to do it. I know I'm constantly trying to remind myself to be more hopeful, be more positive. You get a bit of bad news, and it, as I've said, can ruin your day, but we can learn to refocus that.
And you said the key for learning that is over time, I understand, is starting somewhere and not expecting each and everything from the beginning. And what else? Yeah. Like, how can we learn to be more hopeful? Is it really just start somewhere and then expect it to take time?
Yeah, I think even in terms of, sometimes we need to read books and see images and meet people who are more hopeful as well. Sometimes you do need to engage in whatever way you can with positive messages. It could be podcasts, for instance, you enjoy. listening to something that you think, yeah, I get that. That makes me feel better. That can help. If we're in an environment where we're only hearing bad things, it's hard to remain hopeful. And there's been so many difficult times over the last 2 years of things happening around the world that leave us feeling hopeless. And we have to be realistic. There are dark things that happen. There's difficult times and people do bad things. We can't just pretend, positive psychology isn't about saying nothing bad happens, because it does. I think when positive psychology came out, it was very much of, we just need to be more happy, or that's the perception of it. Everyone thought, well, that's ridiculous. We can't be happy all the time. We have to be compassionate with ourselves. We all have dark times. Things are difficult. And I think that acceptance, that compassion, that self-kindness are crucial, because otherwise we're just in denial. If we, my life is not perfect, neither is yours. None of our lives are perfect, but we can make the best out of our lives by choosing where we spend our time thinking, what we devote our time to. Even phoning up a friend who we've lost contact with for 6 months or a year and having that good chat, you come off the phone, you feel good. You feel in a better place. You've laughed, possibly cried, but you feel in a better place. Connections are huge. I mean, we are very much a social group. And I think I now work remotely, and I think it is a challenge for all of us to maintain connections with other people. And it is something, again, we've evolved to do. We are social animals. And I think we've all become a little bit more insular, where we don't reach out as much as we did. And that certainly is something we need to be mindful of and try and promote where we can.
Absolutely. Yeah. Also, what I like to do every once in a while, and I remind myself of doing so as well, is cold calling friends or family members that I didn't call for some time. So it's just out of the blue. Yeah. I believe all of us have those connections that we speak very regularly to. You have this one friend, you have another family member, and you talk with them weekly or even daily or bi-weekly. But we all have a few people that we don't talk to that often. And every once in a while, I remind myself, just call up this one cousin or just call up this one friend. And usually super interesting conversations do take place, and a lot of hope and happiness is created on both ends of the phone. So it never backfired and somebody was like, dude, why did you even call, right? So I think it is an active effort that we all take, but the rewards are potentially quite great. So
yeah, and we can even do that. As earlier on, I was talking to you and mentioned that I've got 2 dogs. The small town I live in Northern Ireland, they know me because I'm constantly walking dogs, it seems. I don't always walk them together, so it seems like I'm always walking a dog. I try, not everyone I meet, but often I'll stop and have a conversation with someone, because, and it's, again, to your point, it's never gone wrong. Either people are in a hurry and they can't talk, and that's fine. But often you get talking to someone, especially older people who maybe have less social connections, and especially over various lockdowns that we've been in, the connections have been huge. My daughter said to me, you talk to everyone. I said, well, everyone has a story to tell. And it's true. We've all got stories to tell. You meet some amazing people. So we can even do that in a small sense. These, I suppose, even in terms of self-care, I view it very much at a macro and a micro level. The macro level might be nice holidays, a comfortable house, these sort of things. But at a micro level, there's so many small things that we can do, like just smiling at someone and saying hello. And sometimes we need to remind ourselves to do it when you're in a bit of a grump and it's spring with rain and you're out with your dog. That's when you need to smile and say, hi, how's it going? You know?
Absolutely. Smiling at people, greeting people, and maybe even having a chat with all those different strangers. I think we are pretty much alike there. I also tend to do that, and people sometimes do not understand, why would you talk to this person or to that person? But again, usually it's good fun, and I can only recommend each and everybody that at least try it out, because no bad things will happen if you say hi to someone. And if you smile, nothing bad can happen.
Sometimes people don't respond, but I try and sort of think, I don't know what's going on in their life. They could have had some bad news. We just don't know. But I don't know, in the first lockdown here, you weren't allowed pretty much to go out unless you had a dog. And I used to take my dog out first thing in the morning. I'd get up really early. It felt like we were in some sort of weird zombie apocalypse. So I was getting up really early in the morning when it was still dark. And I'd see this lady, an older lady, out going for a walk at the same time. And I'd always make a point of a quick hello, how are you doing? Because I thought she might be going back to a house where she's seeing no one for the rest of the week. I don't know. And I still see it, and I always say hello to her just because you don't know the situation someone is in. So maybe it helps, maybe.
No, absolutely. And I appreciate that you do what you do. And I also do appreciate that you share all those techniques that you have shared over the past minutes, past hour with us. Jeremy, we all like to tell stories. Is there something that we didn't touch ground today that you would like to share? Anything that you would like to recommend, that you would like to tell the audience?
I don't know. Do you know, one thing to watch? Here's something I give as a gift to most people I talk to, because there's a one video you might have seen it called Pale Blue Dot. It's actually, the story is, or the words were written by Carl Sagan. It's something that had a profound effect on me. When Voyager 1, the spaceship, left the solar system, it was launched in, I'm going to get these details wrong, but it was launched in, I don't know, the 70s. 30 years later, more than that, 40 years later, it was then about to leave the solar system, and Carl Sagan convinced NASA to get them to spin the satellite round, or the spaceship round, one last time using some of its remaining energy, and take a photograph. And there's a lovely picture. It looks a grainy picture. If you didn't know what it was, you'd think, well, that's a rubbish picture. But it's a little blue dot, and the little blue dot is Earth, and it's caught in this beam of light. And Carl Sagan wrote a wonderful piece about that. And there's a video on YouTube. There's a few videos, so find kind of the official one if you can. And it's Carl Sagan's words. And they've created a video of a sort of virtual camera going through all the planets in the solar system to the edge. And he talks about looking, our lives, that we're looking at we're quite small individuals, but we have that connection with the other individuals on Earth. And to me, it's very much around hope. Some people might watch it and think it's almost hopeless, but to me, it's full of hope. It's full of that, wow, we've sent a spaceship to the end of the solar system. It's flying along at 50,000 miles an hour or whatever it is, still going out there. We've done that as humans. We don't have to mess things up. We can do it if we work together. And it's quite a good reflection on humanity, the bad things, but also the good things. Now, that would be my parting thought, because it's something I love. I'll watch that every so often to boost my hope.
Oh, wonderful. No, it sounds wonderful. I haven't seen it myself. I'm going to make sure to find it, and also to link it to the speaker notes. That sounds like a very great reminder of hope and of unity and of community and of so many more things. Probably it's again what you make of it, but I will certainly link to that. And with that, Jeremy, there is 3 questions that I ask each and every of my guests. But before we go there, where can people find more about you if there are, and I'm sure they are interested? Where can they read from you? Where can they hear from you? Where can they see you?
Great. I'm on LinkedIn, Jeremy P. Sutton. So Jeremy P. Sutton. I've also got a website called explorethelimits.com. And I'm currently working, we've talked a bit about hope. I'm kind of in the process in its very early stages, but of creating a community website around hope called Project Hope. If you go to explorethelimits.com, there's a link in there. And I'm just starting to put things together. I don't quite know where it's going, but sometimes you just have to start these things, because who knows what'll happen.
Absolutely. And it already looks very interesting. And there's a lot of great content that actually, creates hope. And there's a lot of great articles. So please do check it out. I will certainly link it to the podcast speaker notes. And thank you for that. And then I have those 3 questions, if you are ready for them. And the first one would be, Jeremy, what motivated you this week?
A good one. And I know we've talked about this a lot. I would say running. As you know, I had COVID last week. I'm feeling good, and thankfully I'm fully vaccinated up, so it wasn't too bad. I've been so motivated to get out running. I'm going to go this lunchtime. After we finish talking, I'm going to go out for a run. I might take one of my 2 dogs. It just, for me, I get such peace from it. It just puts me in a very good place. So that has been a strong motivation. Get well, get outside and start enjoying it. We're heading into spring here. Northern Ireland has a wide range of weather, but it's a beautiful place. It's very green, and I just love getting out. We've got mountains and lakes and everything. So for me, I just love getting out.
Wonderful. And I think sports, and especially a run, is a great motivator. So I wish you a lot of fun, which I'm sure you're going to have. That's a great motivator. The second one would be, who are your mentors, or whom do you look up to?
Yeah. Do you mean as in family? Like, do you mean as in people I know, or people I...
It could be really anything. Again, it could be your daughter that inspires you. It could be the Dalai Lama. It could be one of the great people you quoted before. There's no right and wrong answer. There's something like, I would like to understand, who inspires the great thinking people like Jeremy?
That's great. I think my dad has been a huge inspiration. He passed away over 20 years ago, but it's funny, I've revisited a lot over the years, especially since having children myself. Revisited my relationship with him and thought all that he did for us that I didn't appreciate at the time. So he is a massive influence on my life. My wife is just amazing. She's not listening to this, so she can't, she doesn't know. And my 2 daughters, they really are. So they give me such joy. They really do. You know, I said earlier on when I was saying to my daughter about everyone has a story to tell. She said, her answer was, yeah, but not everyone knows what that story is. I thought, that's so deep from an 8-year-old. So yeah. In terms of other, I not so much recently, but I did an MA many years ago in philosophy. I was very inspired by the work of Jean-Paul Sartre, existentialism, you know, that kind of we are what we do, that sort of thing. Some of the intrinsic motivations, such as DC and Ryan, they're very interesting. I do love the work of, and I'm sure I pronounced this incorrectly, but Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi around flow. Flow is a fascinating thing. And I think whether you're doing a sport or whether you're writing an article or you're just creating something, when you get those moments of flow, they're just beautiful. They're just, and one last one I'll throw in as a random thing. There's a writer who, my absolute favorite writer is a guy called Hermann Hesse, who was around many years ago. And he wrote a book called Steppenwolf, which I just loved. It's one of the few books I've read multiple times. And it's in some ways you could view it as quite a dark book, but I find it an amazing experience of an individual as they get older. But is it a book you've come across?
I came across, I think I finished it the last time, February last year. So not even too long ago. Steppenwolf. I believe I read each and every book from Hesse easily. And Steppenwolf is one of those books that certainly leaves an impression. It is pretty dark, but it's still, I believe, it is a summary of what we just talked about. I mean, it is what you make from it, I believe. I think it's also what do you understand this book is about. And there is a lot of wisdom in it. And there is a lot of wake-up call for me in it. And there is a lot of interesting characters, I would just call them. So certainly Steppenwolf is a very interesting book, and Hesse itself certainly as well.
Like The Glass Bead Game as well, Peter Kamenzen. There's a few others like that. So yeah, he's a great author to check out. I think he was very popular in the 60s, but maybe is less well known now.
Yeah. Awesome. There is a lot of inspiration and a lot of love for your family. Love it.
Yes,
and
totally.
That brings me to the last questions, and we've almost touched it. No, we didn't, but I call that the alien scenario, the 3 truths. So Jeremy, imagine you are in a space shuttle for yourself for multiple years, flying all by yourself out of space. And maybe you're just turning around and you see this planet Earth one more time, and you continue going for some time, and out of a sudden you meet a human-like species, but they can only process 3 facts or truths about humanity before they decide they want to get to know them or they don't want to get to know them. What do you tell them? Which are those 3 things that you want to share with them?
3 things. Well, I'm going to go back for the first one. I'll actually do them in words, I think. I would go back, interestingly, I'm getting a bit of an insight into my own VIA strengths here, because I'm coming back again to love. I think love, this is going to sound slightly hippie-ish, but I think love is the real driving force with humanity, and that for all the mistakes we all make, that's the positive. That if you can, so that I'm going to tie in then with, the next one sounds an odd one, but I'm going to say mistakes. We're great at making mistakes, but please, Mr. Alien or Mrs. Alien, give us a break, because we normally fix it. That's how we learn. And then the third one, I'm going to come back to hope again. I think we're, as a species, we've evolved to be hopeful, because otherwise we'd have never spread out around this planet. We'd have stayed in one place because we'd have thought, we can't go anywhere, it'll all go wrong, we're doomed. But it's that level of hope that I think makes humanity so amazing. You know, that even in the most awful situations, even when people are doing terrible things to other people, individuals or countries, there's hope at the end of it. So yeah, that'd be my 3. There's definitely those themes keep returning.
No, absolutely. And it's wonderful last thoughts, wonderful last words, the love, the mistakes and what we can learn from it, and the hope that it all creates. So with that, Jeremy, such a pleasure. It was really great fun.
Really good.
Thank you so much. And I'm sure we will welcome you, or at least invite you again to the Just Another Mindset podcast.
I would love to, Ismail. It's been a pleasure. And I've really enjoyed our chat. So let's keep talking. Yeah,
absolutely.
If you enjoy this podcast and learn from it, share this episode with a friend or 2, and make sure to subscribe to the Just Another Mindset podcast on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcast. On Apple, you may leave up to a 5-star review. Know that you will help to create more meaningful content if you do. If there is any future topic or guest that you would like to hear more about on the Just Another Mindset podcast, please let me know by leaving a comment on YouTube or sending a direct mail to contact@ismailwondergarten.com. And if nobody told you lately, be reminded that you are worthy, you matter, and you can achieve anything.
Do more of what makes you happy. Be yourself positive. Change. Just another mindset.